What if Jesus of the Bible and Muhammad of the Quran aren't the same figures you have in mind right now? For years, people have shaped their lives, cultures, and civilizations based on the stories of their prophets, and these stories have often been accepted as divine truth among humans, greatly influencing the laws of nations as well as the morals of individuals' lives. But when we look at these so-called truths from a historical perspective, without the lens of faith, they're full of contradictions and errors that could undermine the very core of Christian and Muslim beliefs. Yet many Christians and Muslims accept these stories without question and oppose what historians have to say. Today, let's take a look together at some of the main misconceptions that are common among Christians and Muslims. Let's start with one of the most fascinating historical misconceptions: the miracles of these two figures. For Christians, the miracles of Jesus include walking on water, healing the sick, and raising the dead. But for Muslims, there are many more extraordinary miracles, and the Quran itself says something different. In fact, Muhammad is said to have performed a series of supernatural miracles to be able to compete with the miracles that Jesus performed at that time. Yes, in Islamic traditions, there is a lot of talk about the splitting of the moon and also water flowing from between the Prophet's two fingers. But the Quran, the holiest book for Muslims, states very clearly that whenever people asked the Prophet for a miracle, the Prophet would tell them that the Quran itself is the miracle. In fact, in Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 50, we see that this is stated very explicitly. In fact, the idea was that the very fact that such an uneducated person could write such a book was itself a miracle. Well, now you must be wondering where these miracles came from. When Muslims were expanding their territories and spreading Islam, they encountered the miracles of Jesus, which were presented by Christians. So, in order to show miracles from their own prophet that could stand up to those of the Christians, they created such miracles. This wasn't a grand deception, but rather the natural evolution of a narrative shaped by the culture and circumstances of that time. But regarding Jesus, it should be mentioned that Christians consider his miracles to be absolutely unique. However, we should also know that in the Greco-Roman world, this wasn't something unusual. Gods like Asclepius were famous for miraculous healing, and their temples were filled with testimonials from patients. Figures such as Apollonius of Tyana, who was a contemporary of Jesus, are said to have performed exorcisms or even brought someone back from the dead. This doesn't mean denying the miracles of Jesus. In fact, they should be compared within the cultural context of that time. And if someone like Jesus hadn't been reported to perform such miracles, that would actually be something to question and discuss, not the fact that miracles are attributed to him. As a result, both Muslims have accepted such accounts that are not in the original text of their book, and Christians have also accepted that, given the cultural and historical context, narrating such miracles was common, and if such miracles hadn't been reported, that would have been questionable. And here, we can criticize both groups for attributing such miracles to both individuals. The next one is one of the biggest cliches. It's the idea of Jesus as a peacemaker versus Muhammad as a warrior. It's a simple and appealing image, but if you look at it from a historical perspective, it falls apart. Jesus, as the prophet of peace in the modern Christian world, with phrases like "turn the other cheek" or "blessed are the peacemakers," has left very beautiful images of love among Christians. But there are other statements found in the Gospels as well, like the statement in Matthew 10:34, where it says, "I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." Theologians interpret this as a metaphor for division, but it's still a powerful and striking statement. Likewise, overturning the tables of the money changers in the temple wasn't exactly a peaceful or pacifist act. It actually left behind a rather violent image. In fact, Jesus' message was very radical and complex, combining a call to love with judgment. Now, let's flip the coin. In Western countries, Muhammad is mostly remembered as a warrior, but that's not the whole picture. In fact, for the first 13 years, Muhammad lived in Mecca as part of a tribe that was mostly persecuted, and it was only after migrating to Medina that he became a powerful military leader. And most Muslim theologians interpret this as these wars being fought for their own survival and the survival of their tribe, so that their tribe wouldn't be wiped out, and that the wars were more about politics and gaining influence and power. Well, actually, from all this, we can conclude so far that today's powers change the image of these prophets to suit their own interests, so that we see them in a way that fits their perspective and advances their current political agenda. This part might be the most upsetting, because it damages the historical foundation of both religions. In fact, both religions claim to be historically based. But secular history tells a different story. Christianity is built on a central foundation, the crucifixion of Jesus, faith after his death, and the day of resurrection. But Islam completely rejects this and, in this verse, says that it only appeared to them that Jesus had died, and that someone else was crucified instead. And in fact, Islam has completely rejected this. The historical problem here is that even non-religious accounts have confirmed the crucifixion of Jesus. For example, Tacitus, a Roman historian, and Josephus, a Jewish historian, have both generally confirmed this and acknowledged the execution of a person in this manner at that time. But the denial in the Quran comes from a theological perspective that says God would not allow his prophet to suffer such a tragic death. Now it's Islam's turn. In fact, critics of Islam claim that such a prophet and such a person never even existed, because historical sources about his biography were written centuries later. In fact, the earliest writing we have is from Ibn Ishaq, which was written 400 years after Muhammad, and even that is said to have been based on the book of Ibn Hisham. Ibn Hisham himself wrote his biography 1 or 2 centuries after Muhammad, and the existing narrations and hadiths currently, no book by Ibn Hisham is available, and the archaeological evidence that exists dates to nearly 50 years after Muhammad's life. But Islamic historians say something different. They say there are inscriptions and papyri from several years after Muhammad's life. This in itself can be a strong piece of evidence. And likewise, Islamic historians argue that such a massive conquest by the Arabs at that time couldn't have happened without the existence of this Muhammad figure who is mentioned. So here, we have a mirrored image. On one side, Muslims reject a key event or point from Christianity that many historians have accepted, and at the same time, many critics of Islam deny the very existence of the Prophet, a theory that many Islamic historians have also rejected. In fact, from the perspective of modern historians, both of these religions face a very significant challenge. So, what's the conclusion? The flawless stories that have been created about Jesus and Muhammad don't hold up against historians, and the images of Jesus as a miracle worker, Muhammad as a warrior, and Jesus as a peacemaker all fall apart. The historical and foundational claims of each religion, like the crucifixion and even the very character of the prophet, are brought into question and debated by history. Pointing out these complexities isn't actually an attack on faith, but rather a more honest look at beliefs and their roots in your mind. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Check out the content on our channel. We've examined all topics from all religions with all historians and researchers, and we present them to you without any religious bias. We also voice the questions that are on your mind and answer them. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our future research. We're waiting for your comments to find out which of these challenges we mentioned surprised you the most, so we can make more videos about it. Until the next video, goodbye.